Hello, everyone. Welcome to Gardening TLC. I am Michelle. Welcome to my channel. Today, we're going to talk about ornamental grasses. I love ornamental grasses in the garden. There are so many things to love about them. The first being that they're pretty darn low maintenance. They're drought tolerant. They're, for the most part, pest free. There's a lot of different colors and shapes, and you just got to love the movement that they create in the garden. So today I'm going to answer some of the most common questions that I get asked, talk about kind of their growing habits, and then we'll go over some of my favorites that I absolutely love in the garden. So come along and let's go check it out. Okay, how many of you have a nightmare story about an ornamental grass that you planted in your landscape? You really didn't know what you were getting yourself into, and the next thing you know, this grass was taking over your world. I have had that happen to me, and it happened back when I was a beginner gardener and I really didn't know anything about ornamental grasses. And I went to the garden center and I bought this beautiful variegated ribbon grass, and it was so pretty. And I was like, oh, that will look so pretty in the garden. And I put it in, and the next thing you know, oh my gosh, it was everywhere in my garden. And it took me like 4 years to get it out of my garden. It was a nightmare. And I'm sure there are other people out there that have a similar story or experience with a grass. So I sell grasses at the garden center, and it's one of the questions that I get asked all the time is, which grass should I grow and will it spread? It is like a fear that people have because they've seen it happen in other people's yards, and they certainly don't want it to happen in their own yard. So today I thought I would do a video and talk about the habitat and the growing habit of grasses to maybe give you some more education so that if this is something that maybe you're thinking about adding to your garden, but you've been afraid to do it, this will help you make a better choice of what to plant in your garden. True grasses belong to the Poaceae family or the grass family. Now, there are other lookalike grasses out there, but technically they're not grasses. An example of this would be like loriope. That's not a grass. Or even a sedge. That's not a true grass either. It's a lookalike. It belongs to a different family. So we're going to kind of cover what are some of the differences of the two. And for the most part, we're going to be talking about grasses that are in the grass family or the Poaceae family. One family out there is called Cyperaceae. It is the sedge family, and the plants in this family have triangular stems and the leaves are spirally arranged. So some common members include sedges like carex or even papyrus or cypress. Those are all in the sedge family and are not a true grass. The next one I want to talk about is called a Juncaceae. So this is actually the rush family. Now, most rushes are native to wet or moist soils, and they are best near water. Now, a number of rushes are becoming popular as summer annuals and grown in containers. The one that I can think of that is probably the most common out there is called blue dart. And we have some of this planted in our pond. And I also use this as some of my centerpieces in pots over by my urn area last year, and it looked fabulous. The last one to cover will be the Typaceae or the cattail family. Now, members of this family are found worldwide. They're growing in or near water. Now, cattails are warm season plants. They're very aggressive naturalizers. So I would avoid planting these unless you can control them, because I guarantee you they will get out of control faster than you can say your name. I'm not going to really be talking that much about anything in the rush family or the cattail family. Most of what I'm going to cover is going to be a true grass in that Poaceae grass family, and I will cover some of the sedges that are in the Cyperaceae family. So let's jump in and talk about just some of the habits of the grasses. I have moved myself into the back office, and as you can see, I have all of my houseplants in here. We are hoping that we can keep them alive for the next 3 months because they can't go back outside until the temperatures are over 50 degrees. Yeah, we'll see how that goes. All right, back to grasses. Now, grasses can be divided into two groups. We have cool season and warm season. Cool season grasses grow when the ground starts to warm up and is about 60 to 65 degrees. Here where I live in Northern Illinois, that typically happens middle of April, end of April, and then they grow. They grow while it's cool out. They usually get their plumes on them by the middle of June, end of June, and then they go dormant and they just kind of sit there through the heat of the summer. They might grow just a little bit more when the temperatures fall back down the other direction in the fall. But these guys are typically the grasses that are smaller or medium sized grasses. So, no ginormous, huge, cool season grasses. But what's nice about them is if you're looking to get some height quickly, a cool season grass will be able to do that for you if you choose one of the medium sized grasses. Now, we also have warm season grasses. Here where I live in Northern Illinois, Zone 5, they don't start to grow until the end of May. That ground needs to be warm for them to get going. So typically you're looking for a ground temperature between 65 and 70 degrees for them to go. They are going to grow through the heat of the summer. Typically, your larger grasses are warm season grasses. They get their plumes on them more towards the middle of August, all the way into September. They're also the ones that look really awesome in the fall, and they get those really cool colors on them. Now, a lot of the warm season grasses also have really nice coloring through the blades of grass while they're growing with pinks and reds, and they have really nice blues and gray greens and just lots of really great colors. So, warm season or cool season, that's how they're going to be categorized. Grasses are also categorized by running grasses or clump forming grasses. And this is the part that you really need to know, because if you buy a grass that is a running form of grass, like I did, that ribbon grass back in the day, you'll regret it unless that's really what you're going for. So the running grass can actually spread two different ways. It can spread through a rhizome, which is an underground root, or it can spread by a stolon, which is an above ground root. Well, it's not really a root, it's more like a stem. So that ribbon grass that I planted, that would be an example of a grass that spreads underground with a rhizome. Now, clump forming grasses typically are not invasive, and they have a very specific habit of how they grow. Now, it doesn't mean that they won't spread by seed, but they don't spread by roots. I would say that the two grasses that I find spread the most by seed would be the Panicums or the Miscanthus. So those are the ones that I think you have to be a little more cautious with than some of the other ones. Grasses are typically pretty low input plants. Most of them grow in full sun. There are some that will take some shade. Most of them will grow pretty much in any kind of soil as long as it's draining. And there are some that will grow in wet areas. They don't really require a whole lot of love to give you so much goodness in the garden. You can plant grasses in the spring, but you can also plant them in the fall. I think spring is better. That way, they've got a good opportunity to really get a root system going. The one thing I find, though, when I planted grasses is that a lot of times you get them in the containers and they're really root bound. So make sure you break those roots up a little bit and make your hole wider than it was in the pot. That way, the roots have a chance to spread out versus continuing to circle around. If you can backfill it with some compost, go for it. Otherwise, just use your native soil. Make sure you tamp them in, water them in well. And that first season, they do need maybe a little bit more water than they would need later on. They are very drought tolerant, but remember, drought tolerant doesn't happen day one. Drought tolerant happens after they get established and they're really going in the ground. Typically, it takes grasses 3 years to get full size. Some of them might take 4 years. The other thing is grasses don't need to be fertilized. In fact, they don't really want it or need it. I find that if you fertilize your grasses, it like pushes growth on them and it makes them flop over because they grow so fast because you fed them that they don't have an opportunity to get really strong stems on them. So skip that part. They don't need it. Typically, you can figure that a grass is going to get just as wide as it is tall. So if you buy a grass that says it's going to get 6 feet tall, it can get up to 6 feet wide. The bigger a grass gets, the more you're going to have maybe dying out in the center. So the way a grass grows is from the center out. And once that clump gets really big, it's hard for nutrients and light to get into the center of that plant. So it might be after 4 or 5 years, after it's full grown, those centers might start to die out. And that's where you want to like divide your grass and bring it back down to a smaller clump and either gift it out to somebody or plant it in different places in your yard. Now, most grasses will benefit from a light mulching around them. It helps hold the moisture in so that they will stay drought tolerant and it looks nice. The other thing is when it's time to cut the grass back. Now, you can cut them back in the fall or you can cut them back in the spring. I cut some of mine back in the fall and I cut some of them back in the spring. It really depends on how strong and stiff that grass is through the winter. We get heavy snows here. And if I leave a grass up that's not like stiff and erect, what happens is it looks great when I get that first dusting of snow or a frost on it. But the minute we get a hard, heavy snow, bam, it's on the ground and then it stays there the rest of the season and doesn't look great. There are some other benefits, though, especially if you're in zone 4, zone 3, or even zone 5. If you have harder winters, leaving that grass up can protect the crown of your grass from those drying out winds that you get with the winter storms. So that might be a reason to leave it up. The one thing you want to make sure you do, though, is if you have those cool season grasses that start to grow right away, you want to make sure you get that grass cut back so that you don't have old and new growing together because that looks horrible. I would say the biggest disease that I've ever seen on grasses would be rust. And the only time I ever see it is when they're planted too close together and they don't have airflow, or we have a summer that's just got a lot of humidity or a lot of rain and they're bigger grasses and they can't ever dry out in the center. That's usually when I see that. So if I see that kind of problem, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut that out, dispose of it, not put it in my compost pile, and then I'll treat it with a fungicide the following spring before they start to come up, and that usually clears it right up. Ornamental grasses add a totally different aesthetic appeal than, say, perennials, because you're not relying on flowers to give you the look in the garden. You're relying on the shape of the grass, and there's all different kinds of shapes, from the weeping grasses where the plumes come up over the top of it to the V-shaped grasses where the plumes are coming up through it. There's so many different colors and sizes. They add movement to the garden, and they're just absolutely gorgeous. Now, the size of your grass can be dictated based on the growing conditions that it's growing under. And you could have a really wet spring and the grass gets bigger than the tag says, or you could live in a really dry area and maybe you're not supplementing that water at all and they don't get as big as the tag says. So growing conditions can really dictate how big or small they get. So remember, you still want to give them enough room to grow based on what the tag says, but just know Mother Nature does what Mother Nature does. All right, we're going to talk about some of the different species, and this is not an all-inclusive list. It's going to be a pretty good list, though, and hopefully you're going to be able to get educated on the different kinds of species that are out there so that you can pick one that will work for you. Now, a lot of the references that I'm making as far as like different cultivars, they're the ones that I'm familiar with here in Zone 5. As with anything that you do a little bit of your own homework and your own research to make sure that what you're growing in your area works. I might talk about a grass, and I'll give my example of a Hakanakloa grass, which for me is a very well-behaved grass. But for somebody else in different conditions, that might be an invasive grass for you. So ask around at the garden centers, ask other gardeners, check with the extension office in the county that you live in. Great resource to use. So I'm going to give you my experience with the different species that I'm going to talk about and hopefully give you enough information that you can make an informed decision about what grass will work for you. We're going to talk about carex species first. Now, remember, they are not true grasses. They're a member of the Cyperaceae family. The majority of carexes, or you might know them as a sedge, they're going to grow between 12 and 36 inches tall. For easy identification, just remember this little rhyme. Sedges have edges. Isn't that cute? All right. It basically means that they have a triangular stem. Most of them form clumps, but there are sedges out there that will run underground with a rhizome. So make sure if you're going to buy a carex or a sedge, you know what you're buying. You're buying a clump forming one or you're buying one that spreads. If they're happy, they can really take off. Now, some sedges, the further south you go, will be semi-evergreen or evergreen. So to cut those back or to take care of those when winter's over, you basically just have to cut them back far enough to take care of any winter damage. If you're further north and you're growing one of these, you're going to cut them back 3 inches from the ground because they're probably more of a deciduous sedge that's dying back anyways. Some of my favorite calyxes, though, are the Bowler's Golden. It's also can be listed as Aria. I really like this one. It has a gold striped leaf. It retains a really strong yellow color if it's grown in full sun. If you grow it in the shade, it gets a little bit more of like a lime yellow. It grows in zone 5 through 8, and this one reaches like 24 inches high, has a nice sweeping habit to it. Absolutely beautiful. The other calyx that you'll see a lot of out there is called Evergold. Now, here we grow it as an annual in zone 5 because this is only growing in zone 6 through 8, but it usually gets 16 to 18 inches tall. It's just a very nice, pretty variegated sedge. Our next grass is going to be blue fescue. I really like blue fescue. It is so striking in the garden. Now, this is a cool season grass and it is clump forming. Usually they stay well below 2 feet, and that's when they have their little plumes on them. Fescue will actually persist well into winter if it's not packed down by snow and ice. It'll hold on to a lot of that blue color. And if you really want really good results, when you plant blue fescue, you don't want it touching each other or any other plant. It really needs to stand alone. It grows absolutely fabulously in well draining soil. If you have heavy clay, not so much. And if you have like soil that holds on to water a lot, they will root rot and they won't do well. So, mulching around these or putting this in a gravel bed is a really good idea. Basically, they're going to get their little flowers usually late May and into June. The other thing is if you are in a hot, humid environment, the plants will decline over time. They just don't like that. And if you ever find that the center of the grass is dying out, usually that's a sign of either heat or water stress. Now, I have a lot of people tell me that they don't like the fescue, but you know what I find after I talk to them is that they never cut it back. And so they have the old grass growing with the new grass. Now, the one thing with fescue is it's got a really hard center on it, and you can almost feel that. So you want to make sure that when you're cutting it back, you don't cut into that hard clump and just cut the outside edges of that so that new, beautiful blue blades of grass can come up through there. My favorite two are probably the Elijah Blue. It's got a really pretty bright powdery blue foliage. And then there's one called Boulder Blue. Oh my gosh, this has got the most fantastic metallic blue foliage on it. Either one of those looks so good in the garden. All right, the next one we're going to talk about is the Hakanakloa Japanese forest grass. Now, this is a grass that spreads through rhizomes underground. Now, for me, it's pretty well behaved. I'm growing mine in compost. I don't give it supplemental water. It's not spreading all over the place. But just know, this can spread all over the place under the right conditions. It can be aggressive. But what I love about this grass is one, it grows in the shade. And two, it's got this beautiful, graceful, arching growth habit. And usually your mounds grow around 24 inches high. Now, in Japan, where it's native, it grows in cool, moist areas. Now, here, I like to grow it in the shade, but it usually gets between 4 and 6 hours of sun. And I try to protect it from hot afternoon sun. If you're going to cut it back, usually what I'm doing is I leave mine up. And if I have a mild winter, it hangs on for most of the winter. And then I just clean off the winter damage. If we have a really hard winter, it'll take it back. And then I have to cut it all the way back to the ground. There are two that I really like. One of them is called Areola. It was the 2009 Perennial Plant Association's Plant of the Year. It's this absolutely beautiful yellow. It's got a nice green striped foliage on there. The other one that's really nice is called All Gold. It's a little bit bigger. And it's got this lime gold foliage. And the more sun you give this one, the more like chartreusey gold it becomes. Both of those cultivars and pretty much all of the Hakanakloa grass are growing in zone 5 through 9. Let's talk about pennisetums. It's a pretty large group made up of like 80 different species. Now, this is a warm season grass. It'll tolerate full sun and it'll tolerate light shade. So we're not talking like shade. We're talking at least 6 hours of sun. And afternoon sun would probably be better than morning sun in the case of a grass. Now, most pennisetums will grow pretty much in any soil you put it in. They're not that picky. But just know, a lot of the pennisetums will spread because they throw their love around with their seeds. So make sure you do a little homework where you live to find out which ones reseed more readily than others. Now, the one thing that I do like about this is there are some that will grow up here in zone 5, and a lot of them actually grow further south than here. So there's some that you guys get to grow like in zone 6, 7, 8, 9 that I can't grow because they won't make it through the winter. So one of the ones that I really like, and it's a series, I like the Hamlin, and I like the Little Bunny, and I like the Piglet. So those three are some of my favorite pennisetums. I find that they don't readily seed like some of the other ones. There is one called Redhead. I really like that grass, but I found through growing it that this thing freely throws its seeds everywhere, and you will have babies all over the place. So this one you have to take care with. And that's what I mean. Some will readily seed and some won't. So you want to make sure that you do your homework on this particular cultivar to find out which ones throw their seeds around. It is a clump forming grass, and most of them are anywhere from 18 inches tall all the way up to, I don't know, I think the biggest one might be 5 or 6 feet tall, but it is a nice grass. You just got to get the right one. I cannot tell a lie. So on almost all of these, I have to go to my phone and upload. How do I pronounce this? So the next one is schizocarium or little bluestem. Yeah, I didn't all of a sudden get really good at Greek or Latin. I just figured I better know how to pronounce them so I don't mutilate it as I'm doing this video. So little bluestem is actually a native to North America, and there's a lot of little bluestems. There's big bluestem that you can plant. They're actually native to the prairies and the open woods in North America. It tolerates a lot of growing conditions. Full sun's preferred, but it will tolerate light shade. We're talking like 6 hours. Now, little blue stem does not tolerate rich soils or excessively moist conditions. It's a prairie grass, which means it wants drier conditions. Now, this is a fine textured, warm season clump forming grass. It usually stays below 3 feet, and its foliage is often shades of blue green, and then they change to this beautiful red maroon rust tone in the fall. It is absolutely beautiful in a winter landscape if you can leave it up. Got a pretty good growing zone, zone 3 through 8. And this is one that if you're going to leave it up in the winter, because it's warm season, you want to make sure you get it cut usually by the middle of April. Now, some really nice ones out there are called Carousel. That's one. That one was a new introduction from the Chicagoland Grows, and it was developed by Don Boheme in Rushville, Illinois. It's a nice compact grass that remains upright throughout the winter. And then there's another one called the Blues. This one actually will get all the way down into zone 9, so zone 3 through 9, and it offers an upright habit with a stunning blue foliage accented by red stems. If we go into fall, not if, but when we go into fall, it really has a nice mix of colors of purple, orange, and then all these different shades of blue in it. So if you've never grown a blue stem or a little blue stem, I would recommend it. They are fabulous. Some of my favorite grasses come out of the Calamagratis species. Now, the two most common species have very different seasons of growth. So, the first one is the Calamagratis actiflora. This is the cool season grasses like Carl Foresters, Overdams, Eldorados. They're beautiful. They grow when it's cool out, they bloom in late spring, early summer, and they have a distinct upright columnar growth habit, and they sway in the breeze, offering this beautiful movement in the landscape. Slightly purple flowers will appear on them in June, and then they have a tendency to like wheat out, is what I call it. They get like this weedy color as we progress further into the summer. Now, Carl Forester, it's a very popular ornamental grass. You've probably seen it in parking lots and different landscaping applications around commercial buildings or shopping centers, things like that. It has a deep green foliage and it produces flowers in June, and it usually gets 5 to 6 feet tall, and it grows in zone 4 through 7. Very dependable, pretty much comes back every year. You can plant it in groups and drifts, or you can plant it all by itself. Does well. There's another one called Overdam, a little bit shorter than the Carl Forester, and the biggest difference is it's got a green and white striped foliage on the blade versus that dark green. Now, the Overdam is the one that I have growing in my back garden. Then another one that I think people really like is El Dorado. Now, the El Dorado grows in zone 4 through 8, and this, instead of the green and white striped foliage, it has a green and gold striped foliage. All of them pretty much have the same growing habit, though, as far as what they look like. They're just a little bit different in size, and then the blade color is a little bit different. But very, very nice grass. The one thing I find with calamagratis is they don't spread. They don't spread seeds. They are truly a clump forming grass. Now, the other calamagratis that I like is the Korean feather reed grass. It's one of my favorite grasses. It's a warm season clump forming grass, and it blooms in late summer. When it blooms, it gets these really big, fluffy, champagne pink plumes on it that are just fabulous. I love this grass. It will take light shade, and it'll grow in full sun, and it'll grow in heavy clay. And I love that about this grass. I love to cut the plumes off of it and dry them. I'll use them in my winter arrangements. We'll use them in fall floral. This is one of my absolutely favorite grasses to grow. The habit tends to be more upright, and it has a little bit of arching going on at the very top. But oh, I love this grass. The plumes come up a little bit through it and then over the top of it. Fabulous, fabulous. Zone 4 through 9. If you haven't grown this grass, this is one I would definitely get. Now, I had somebody tell me at a lecture that I did that they grew this grass and it spread all over the place through seed. Now, I have never experienced that. I have grown this grass for years in a lot of different circumstances because it's not really picky about the soil that it gets. And I've never had that happen. So if any of you have experience with this grass and that has happened, leave that in the comments down below. Personally, I've never seen this spread, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't. It just means I've never experienced it. So let us know. There are so many more grasses out there, but the last one I'm going to talk about are panicums. I love panicums because I like the stiff blade that it gets and the upright V-shaped form that it makes when it grows. And it comes in all of these beautiful, spectacular colors. And it has a lot of different options for size. So I have some that I grow at the garden center. They're called Northwind. They've got a beautiful green color to them, and the plumes come up through it, and it gets this beautiful orange red color in the fall. They're going to get probably 6 to 7 feet tall, and these guys get probably 4 to 5 feet wide. I have never had the center die on these. I usually leave them up all winter because they can handle heavy snow on them. And I have plowed snow on top of these darn things. And after it melted, they stood back up. Or another really good cultivar that I like is called Heavy Metal. It's got like this gunmetal gray green color to it that is absolutely striking in the garden. And then Proven Winners has one called Totem Pole that's really nice as well. I have that one growing in my garden as well. I have a shorter one in my garden as well called Cheyenne Sky. That one only gets like 3 feet tall. Oh, love all of the panicums. Now, my experience with panicums is I've never had them spread beyond the clump that they are. I've never had the centers die out because it's kind of like a medium to large size grass, but they don't get so fat that the centers die out. And I've never had them spread around by seed. So it's another one of those grasses that is clump forming that I absolutely love. Most of them are growing in zone 4 through 10. I know I said that Panicum was the last group, but I really do think I need to talk about the Miscanthus sinensis group. This group is probably the most versatile of all the ornamental grasses. Many of the varieties that are available offer a wide selection of growth habits and foliage color, both summer and fall. Now, the majority of them are clump forming grasses, and therefore they don't spread by underground rhizomes. But be careful because a lot of miscanthus do spread through seed. So make sure you check that out before you pick one. All of them are warm season grasses with their flowers appearing typically September, October. Most of them are larger grasses, and they are the ones that get their absolutely beautiful colors in the fall. Now, most of the Miscanthus are growing in zone 5 through 9, but just remember, check and make sure it doesn't freely reseed, whichever one it is that you're choosing. I think that's about all I've got on ornamental grasses, you guys. And I know there's other grasses out there than the ones that I talked about. I just think that this is a good start for anyone who wants to learn about grasses and know a little bit more about them so that they can make a better, more informed decision about which grass to plant in their yard. Now, don't forget, Garden Gab is this Saturday. I will be accepting pictures through Wednesday to add to the Garden Gab. If they come after that, they're going to have to go into March's Garden Gab. We are looking for pictures of your garden in the month that we're in. Take it in a landscape format. Tell me who you are, where you live, what we're looking at, what zone it is, and send it to the email right here. And we will show those pictures while we answer questions about the previous videos. I am leaving for Seattle tomorrow, and I will be doing my Thursday video and Garden Gab when I'm in Seattle. So stay tuned for that. And I think that's all I've got for today. I hope this helped you and I hope you learned something from it. I do have another video on ornamental grasses. It's called Growing Ornamental Grasses. And I linked it down below if you want to go check that one out as well. I actually recorded that one during the summertime where I was walking around showing you all the different grasses that I had growing between my house and the garden center. So you can go check that out if you want more information about some specific individual grasses or you want to actually see them growing and not just pictures of them. That is it for today, you guys. Thank you so much for tuning in and watching today's video. I hope it was helpful. I hope you learned something, and I hope that you can now make a good decision and bring a grass into your garden if that's what you'd like to do and not worry about it spreading and taking over your world. I'm Michelle, and we will see you in the next video. Bye, everyone.